Welcome to the Hit Like a Girl podcast. This is HITea with Grace, where we spill the tea on HITea. I'm very excited to introduce you to Elise Kohl-Grant, who is the CIO of IMSNY in New York City. It's two large behavioral health networks that cover 160,000 patient lives and might even be more than that at this point. Elise, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Grace. I'm so happy to be here. In fact, I have a little secret that I've been doing a few podcast recording lately, and I think I'm most excited about this one. Being on Hit Like a Girl just resonates with me, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun today.
Yes, absolutely. And now Elise and I met in person at HIMSS. She was speaking there, and I was just so inspired by her, and I know you will be too. So tell us all about the uphill battle mental health systems have experienced in their interoperability journey.
So the uphill battle for mental health agencies has been a struggle, right? And I used to work at New York Health Collaborative on the SHINY, which is the State Health Information Network of New York. And I used the word interoperability. One time I counted in my emails, I used the word interoperability 43 times.
Wow. Makes sense for HITea.
I don't think I knew what the word interoperability meant until I was 24 years old and started at this company.
Wow.
So to go from not using a word to using it 43 times in one day is a little crazy. And, I think we use it a lot in the physical health world, but I want to let the audience know that interoperability is very new to the mental health world.
Wow.
And
why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's really new. And I think that we go off a lot of assumptions that mental health agencies and the data that we produce are interoperable to the physical health world. And I go back to this model, which is the technology adoption cycle model. And it's an oldie but goodie. Basically, it's broken out into kind of two markets. You have your early market and your mainstream market. And this is how kind of products view how they're going to launch their product, what the utilization is going to be, what the engagement of their intended consumers are going to be. And in that early market, you have the innovators and the early adopters.
Yeah.
These are the folks that are, quick to use the technology. They're the first ones in the door when the iPhone comes out. They're standing in line. They don't exactly know what it means. You don't need to connect the dots with them. They just are eager to use the product, right? Then you have the mainstream market, which are broken out of three categories. You have your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards. Your early majority are the folks that you might have to help them connect the dots a bit. They sort of get the hype, but they're kind of like, I'm okay with my flip phone. I'll wait for a second. Let's see how this whole, iPhone thing goes. And then maybe I'll, get in line and purchase the first time. Then you have the late majority, which are the ones that are really forced to use the new product, that are forced to use the iPhone. They're the ones who are like, all right, well, I guess I'm not going to be able to FaceTime my grandkids. Maybe I want to get on board. They're the ones whose phone doesn't work and they have to then go and purchase that iPhone. Then you have the laggards, which are the ones that are like, you know what, just send me a card at Christmas. I'll see my grandchildren then. And they usually never get on board.
Yeah.
And when I think about interoperability, I think that in the rest of the world, we are in that late majority phase. Now, there's a lot of quality initiatives we can do. We can definitely work on interoperating systems. But in terms of like the buy-in and the adoption, I would argue we're in that late majority phase. For mental health, we are still very much in that early market that's built up off of innovators and early adopters.
Wow.
I think we forget that because when we're communicating, we're going on this assumption that everyone's in this late majority, everyone's on board, and the mental health agencies are like just getting started.
Wow. Do you think that's because they weren't included in some of like the meaningful use things that came out, or why do you think that is?
I'm glad you brought up meaningful use. I think this goes back when you look back in history. when and where and how mental health, behavioral health agencies were included in this initiative. Now, I know you're familiar with meaningful use. Do you think our listeners are all familiar with meaningful use?
Yeah, you can give a brief background. Actually, could be really useful for the folks that don't know.
Yeah, it's basically like a government. It was a government initiative. Billions of dollars were kicked into getting hospitals and primary care practices up on an electronic health record system. So switching from paper to electronic, right? And a lot of money was poured into this. There were a lot of initiatives and woman power put into helping providers get on board and switch from paper to electronic. Now that went on for years. The providers who were eligible for that funding were not mental health providers. They were not your case managers, your licensed social workers, your peer support advocates. Forgot if psychiatrists were included, perhaps, but only just a few. And so these folks got on board with an electronic health record system. And then the next clear phase was interoperability. Mental health agencies have just started to really be able to utilize electronic health record systems. And even the ones that they're utilizing are not all ONC certified, which that's the type of system or the accreditation of the system you have to use in order to be interoperable.
Oh, so wow, that's even worse.
Yeah, and I will say New York is pretty ahead of the game, which is great for New York. But even then, I would say a good about 20% of our mental health agencies are still not on a, certified EHR. And that's New York. And we're fairly progressive in these areas. I can't imagine what it looks like in other states. But that means that, agencies are still getting over the hump of utilizing their EHR to its fullest capability and figuring out how to put data in the right field so that way it can produce meaningful information.
Yes, truly. So they're trying to figure out, like you said, where do I put the data so that I can make sure that we can use the data, and make sure it's in the right place so I can get the right stuff from it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I mean, absolutely. And even, the staff members, the providers, they go to school to work with individuals that suffer from severe mental illness. I mean, that's the industry that I mostly cater to is the Medicaid population, which is strongly built up of individuals with mental illness and SMI, severe mental illness. So you're talking about providers who are not just taking your blood work, and not to diminish PCPs in any way, shape, or form. They're not taking your blood work and asking you like what, how much you weigh, are you a smoker, are you not? These are providers that are asking you if you have a roof over your head tonight. Are asking
severely nuanced in that you need every aspect, every social determinant of health possible to figure out the whole patient. Yeah.
I mean, absolutely, right? Or have you eaten breakfast? Has your baby eaten dinner last night? When were you sexually abused? Are you living with your parents? Do you have parents? Are you suicidal, right? These are really, really private conversations that makes it hard for a provider to take themselves away from being in that moment with the person that needs them the most and think, oh, I should probably put suicidal in this form, in this field right here, and have not eaten here and is in the system because their parents abandoned them here. I mean, how do you, take yourself away and then think about where you put those really important pieces of information into a structured format? And you kind of hit it on the head is where I wanted to go with this is, the majority or the heart of the information lives in the case notes. And that's unstructured, unstandardized information. And they write it in one big case note, right? And that's really the heart of the data that we're dealing with when it comes to the population that we serve. So how do you pull that information out of the case notes and put it into meaningful structured fields so that way you can send it and you can officially interoperate with another system and you guys can eventually speak back and forth. We're not there. The hype of this conversation is here, but we have a lot more work to do to get there.
So for CIO as IMSNY, you oversee the implementation and utilization of data analytic business intelligence platforms across these two big behavioral health networks. In your job while you're doing that, what type of data is most impactful for, health systems like yours to be tracking?
Yeah. So first of all, you explained it like beautifully. I've been trying to tell my parents this for 3 years.
Take notes.
So being a CIO and building data analytic platforms that cater to the mental health population is challenging because you're dealing with data, like you mentioned, right? That's unstructured. And you're also dealing with this kind of culture change that providers are going through of how do I be a provider and be there in the moment with my patient, but yet also record the absolutely necessary information that's meaningful to create, actionable reports. The data that we are looking at right now, I mentioned the case notes, and that's a struggle because there's a lot of information in there. And what information do you choose to pull out, or can you pull out? I've started to look at natural language processing technology. It's a form of artificial intelligence that I think is very promising in the years to come to help providers kind of pull out those words and those phrases in the case notes to put in a structured field and make meaningful and actionable reports out of that. Another few items that we're looking at that our providers have initiatives around is suicide prevention. What are some of the trigger words that are happening in these therapy sessions? Is this person high risk? Have they attempted suicide before? How many inpatient psychiatric units have they been in the last 3 years? And has that gone up? Has that gone down? Some other items that we are looking at that kind of relate more to the physical health world are metabolic screening. So a lot of our patients are at high risk for diabetes because of social determinants of health factors, right? The food they eat, where they live, their lifestyle, and so on and so forth. So we are really wrapping some initiatives around that in terms of has your patient received a screening? What is the result of that screening? And what is your response to that screening? Many times that screening happens at outside facilities. So right now, we are pulling the information from various HIEs, health information exchanges, to then provide that data to our provider agencies so that way they can act on it.
That is so impactful for your providers to be able to have access to the data that's going on. Say they get seen at the hospital, et cetera. They can see exactly what went on there. Wow, that's amazing. And that must be new. Has it been new since the pandemic started? Like when did this start happening?
It depends on who you ask. If you ask like the physical health world, they'll be like, oh, we've been doing this for a while. But that's not really the case. This was fairly new. We just started doing this. We kind of hunkered down once the pandemic started to connect the health information exchange data sources into our data analytic infrastructure. So this is very new. Before this data connection, providers were asking their patients, their consumers, right? When was your last screening? And I mean, that's self-reported data. And when a person has so many other things to worry about, like transportation, like housing, are they going to really remember when their last screening was? I mean, for me, I can barely call the dentist myself because I'm just too busy, right? And I haven't seen the dentist in like 2 years, which is crazy. So to expect someone who's dealing with much more severe circumstances than I'm dealing with, you can't really expect them to go see their patient.
And to rely on that unreliable data in many ways, like straight from their mouths, like at the time where they're in a critical situation where it could be life and death, it can be figuring out the diagnosis first, waiting another 6 months or something, it's really so much more, even more critical at that moment to have that right data. just straight from, instead of playing telephone. Like,
exactly. And a lot of these consumers, they don't have cell phones. New Yorkers do. We were surprised. Actually, we did a survey and about 80% of Medicaid individuals did have cell phones.
Wow.
But they lose them a lot. They come and go. So it's hard to kind of keep track of these individuals, which is what makes mental health agencies so crucial, because we're the ones providing them with community-based services. So we see these individuals a lot more than the doctors see them, or more than even the hospitals see them, because we're providing services like housing, like food, like clinical services or substance use treatment services. So it's almost, don't even get me into patient attribution, but like when we go into patient attribution, it almost makes sense that the patients and consumers are attributed to their case manager, because they see their case manager much more than they see their primary care provider.
Oh, that's so true. They might see them once a week, even sometimes in serious cases, or maybe even every day if they're in like a group setting. Or you're right, it's far more regular. And for their primary care physician or whatever other physician they have to be able to get your data too is very useful, I'm sure. So they can say, oh, okay, this may be one of the reasons for IBS or whatever other physical symptoms could be from the mental health.
Absolutely. And I think that, it's not a role of a primary care provider to be a care manager in any way, shape, or form. I think they feel overwhelmed of because of this patient attribution model, that patients are attributed to primary care providers. And that's kind of, that's a big wraparound for reimbursement models for insurance companies or Medicaid managed care organizations. But I think they feel an overwhelming sense of, oh my God, I have to do so much more in this short little 20-minute visit with my client, and they shouldn't be responsible for everything. That's what the mental health agencies are here for. And you made a good point when you said that they might want data from those mental health agencies. That's where, going back to what we were talking about, the technology adoption life cycle for interoperability, that's where we're very much in the early market, because we aren't necessarily sending that data back to the hospitals, back to the primary care providers just yet.
Yeah. And that's probably, I guess, a role where the HIE can help with that, depending on how that relationship works. Very interesting, very cool stuff. So I'm wondering, you talked about, particular gaps in care that are often things that can help you close through data and analytics. So we talked about diabetes and that impact. Are there any other particular gaps in care that are being closed now using data and analytics?
Yeah. So I would say we're trying to target no-show rates. There is a huge issue with no-shows in the mental health community, because even more so in New York City, actually, than upstate. I think New York City is very distracting. And even though transportation is great, we're talking about a lot of individuals who might be outside those subway lines that have a really hard time getting to their appointment. There are other, issues that come up in terms of work-related scheduling, childcare, and so on and so forth, and like the change of phone numbers and whatnot. That no-show rates are a huge issue in our community, and we've been really trying to figure out, okay, how can we reduce the no-show rates? How can we be more proactive in calling and reminding patients to come to their appointment? Now, I told you I just got my hair blown out before this call. And, I received a text message reminder about my blowout.
Wow.
And therefore, I was only 5 minutes late instead of 10 minutes late.
Yeah, so getting those text reminders can be critical to prevent those no-shows.
Yes. I mean, and we're not talking about data analytics here. We're talking about kind of more product functionality. But the fact that an individual who suffers from substance use and is maybe suicidal, and we can't do so much as send a text message reminder of their appointment. I mean, like, come on. We're just so far behind the eight ball, and that's probably more related on the EHR side of things. And I don't want to throw my behavioral health EHR vendors under the bus, because I love most of them, or have a good relationship with most of them. But it's just, we're looking at proactive ways to leverage emerging technologies to really try to get an individual to that place. Now, when we talk about analytics, we are starting to pull in history of individuals who have missed their appointment more than 3, 4, 5 times to kind of follow the trend of, okay, this individual is at risk of being a no-show. We should probably target them and put a little more communication and kind of hand-holding to get them to their appointment.
Wow, that's amazing.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention telehealth is a big part of this as well. We did a study, I wish I had the data in front of me, is that the no-show rate did decrease significantly during the pandemic because of telehealth.
People could do it from home, so they didn't miss.
People could do it from home. And, we did a survey that we asked folks, we did a survey and we surveyed 429 patients with severe mental illness in the Bronx. And the main barrier to care was transportation. And this was a unstructured field. We didn't even ask them to check this off. We asked them to just write it in. It was transportation, lack of motivation. But transportation was a big one. And so telehealth really filled in that gap. And because you could just have your appointment from the comfort of your own home or wherever you are residing at that time.
Yeah. How did your providers transition to telehealth? I know that must have been kind of tricky transitioning from the in-person care to the telehealth care. And, what was that transition like for them?
Well, I know we had to drop everything and look at telehealth. So what we did is we halted all the other projects we were working on and said, let's evaluate some telehealth solutions. So a week after New York City got shut down, I contacted every telehealth vendor I could find, did a quick demo with each of them, wrote up a report. I can send it to you to share with the listeners of about 18 telehealth solutions. And then we narrowed it down to 2. Now, mental health agencies don't have a lot of money. This is nothing new. We don't have a lot of funding. There's not a lot of value-based contracts that are directly for mental health agencies. And so we had to look at 2 cheap solutions. We ended up suggesting Doxy.me and Zoom. And so actually it's Doxy.me and Zoom, not Doxy.me, another email.
Yeah.
And these were solutions that our provider agencies use. We negotiated a discount with them. And then we sent off I think we administered to date over 600 licenses, 600 telehealth licenses to our providers. And, it was a culture change, right? Because this is some of the topics that they discuss with their patients are very sensitive, but patients really got on board with it pretty quickly, and providers were forced to use it very quickly, and it spread. And, there were some issues. There's some bandwidth issues, which is actually why, as part of this evaluation, we received feedback directly from providers and patients, consumers, asking them about what we should look for in a solution. And as part of that,
that's amazing that you did that to get their feedback before diving into one. Yeah. What's going to be easiest for you to use, and what will you actually use? Exactly.
And it's amazing how many people don't do that. How many people don't ask their consumers what they actually want to use at the end of the day. And that's how we found out about this bandwidth issue, that they were like, hey, I only have so much data on my phone. I really don't want to use this data to have a telehealth visit. I'd much rather use it to see my sister's kids, right, on FaceTime. And so we picked those 2 solutions because they didn't use as much data when you had that video conferencing.
Brilliant. That makes a ton of sense. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. That's so fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners will find that really interesting. I'm wondering if you could give other mental health systems one piece of advice, regarding this interoperability, data analytics, HITea journey, what would that one piece of advice be?
trust the process. Trust the data process. It's really hard and excruciating. And when we say the word interoperability, it makes it seem so simple, but it's everything but that. One of our agencies, The Bridge, who's located in New York City, they formed a committee that meets twice a week, and it involves a lot of mid-level management that are part of various departments, quality, data, clinical initiatives, and they meet twice a month to discuss all of their different initiatives and really try to kind of do some deep digging into their data to make sure that each data element they're capturing aligns up with those clinical initiatives.
Wow.
Doesn't seem so like it doesn't seem like a new phenomenon, but so many agencies don't do that. And you really got to talk internally to your agency and trust the data process, because you're going to go down some rabbit holes and not find what you're looking for. And then you have to start over. And that's kind of what happened. You're not just going to get this beautiful dashboard that tells you everything you want in a couple weeks. It takes a while to get there, and there's a lot of data cleaning, and you might have to put your headphones on and be in Excel for a couple days. But trust the process, and you'll get there.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Do you work with a data analytics provider that helps you kind of do this process?
Oh, yeah. So we have our population health management tool, which is powered by HITea. I love working with HITea. We were one of their first behavioral health networks to join. So, they've been really open in sort of helping us and us helping them navigate through the behavioral health data to produce meaningful reports. And really what they help us with is connecting to various data sources and displaying it in a meaningful way to our agencies.
Oh, that's really fascinating. So I want to dive now into a little personal question. A little birdie told me that you were a 2017 silver medalist world champion bodybuilder. You can actually hit like a girl. So tell the Hit Like a Girl audience about this journey that got you to that point. You're not only like a data champion in the Behavioral Health Network, but you are a bodybuilding champion.
So the quote, trust the process. I actually heard that quote the first time from my trainer as I was training for my bodybuilding competitions. Is he'd always say, trust the process, trust the process. And I'd be on the treadmill, the Stairmaster. I would live on the Stairmaster in a big oversized sweatshirt with my hoodie up at 6 a.m. in the morning. And I'd just be like, trust the process. What process am I supposed to trust? Like, it was so frustrating to hear trust the process because you're in it day in and day out. I was sweating my butt off in the gym twice a day, would get there at maybe 5:30 in the morning, leave at 8:30 in time to get to work by 9, and then go back to the gym at about 7 p.m. and then get home at around, 9:30 p.m., 10, and then just start it again. Lifting a lot of weights, posing practice. In my travels to and from the gym, I would eat fish and asparagus and more fish and eggs and sweet potato. And those were probably the 4 main food items that I would eat about 6 weeks before I got on stage. And have you ever eaten cold fish?
No, I mean, other than sushi, but not like cold fish. No.
I would eat like cold codfish on my way back from the gym and on my way to the gym, because you have to get something in your body within 30 minutes after you work out. And so that the words trust the process were just playing in my head. And I did not understand that term until it became stage day, where you're getting ready and backstage, and it's just a whole nother world. You have all of these hand bodies that are, pumping weights and getting ready to get on stage, where it's not until that day where it really comes together and your body transforms into a statue like that. And that's when, and that's when I finally put it together. And I was like, oh, I just have to trust the process to get here. And for the first time, I recently, I spoke at the Bridges meeting that I was referring to. It was the first time I ever compared my bodybuilding journey to the data journey. And I'm like,
so trust. I mean, it's an uphill battle. I mean, you weren't given any, incentives. You were kind of thrown into the deep end with a small budget, like do what you can with what you have. And I can't imagine. So what were some of the comparisons that you said in that talk?
Well, on stage day, when your body looks like I can't even say a model, because I don't want to associate beauty with slenderness and, makeup. I want to really associate beauty with strong muscles, hit like a girl. You're strong. You're kind of challenging the concept. You're challenging the concept of beauty. But when you're on stage, they see this masterpiece. And when you have a data visualization and you're thinking about AI, you're thinking about this masterpiece, this beautiful data set where it's going to show you every report and geomap every single service of every single patient that was within that zip code. And, then layer on some predictive analytics and it tells you exactly what to do. It's, behind that beautiful visual, behind that physique that I had on stage were hours and hours and countless hours working to get there, right? Working to present on this one day. And so that's kind of my comparison is
I have goosebumps right now, like just thinking of the hours of just developing these algorithms and sifting through the data and working through with solution providers to just figure this thing out. And you can't, it's hard to see the beauty at the end that will come from all that hard work that you guys are doing right now. And it's really very interesting to think of it that way.
Yeah. And, when you look at when I looked at my physique every day, I didn't see a huge change. It's like, weight loss journey or whatever. If you're growing your hair long, you don't see a change because you're looking at yourself every day. When you're in the trenches and running those algorithms, you don't necessarily see a change every day, right? And it can get really frustrating. And to communicate that to other people, to executives or to staff and saying, hey, we're just not there yet. Communicating to my friends that, hey, I can't go out tonight. Hey, I really just can't eat that apple, because should I eat that apple or should I eat this whole piece of broccoli or fish? Like that, it's hard to translate that when you're in the trenches. And then at the end of the day, people understand when it's, time to perform. People understand when they see that beautiful data visualization. But the communication of the journey is hard.
So as we're finishing this conversation off, right, I have one last question for you. Do you have any advice for women in healthcare or health IT, women that are thinking of going into this industry? Any advice you can give them?
My advice would be get into this industry now. And if they don't give you a seat at the table, pull up a folding chair. That is a quote from Shirley Chisholm, which she was the first Black woman elected to the United States Congress. And it's probably my favorite quote because I think it just resonates with women who are trying to climb up the ladder and get themselves positions in technology. And you really just got to pull up a folding chair.
I love it. That is such great advice. Thank you so much, Elise. And before I forget, tell us what tea you brought with you today, if you happen to bring some tea with you.
Oh, my tea. Of course I brought some tea.
Yay. Cheers.
Cheers. So the tea I chose to drink today is called Mother's Milk Tea. I was pregnant during the pandemic. I had my little pandemic baby. And I think it just goes to show you that women are so strong and they really rule the world. They create
the world and rule the world.
Yes. They create the world. And I mean, even in positions, there's a lot of things that happen that go unnoticed. Have you ever asked the father or the husband to pack a baby's suitcase for a week. And I doubt that many women have even tried to or would even risk that because it just goes to show you that women are very good, not that men are, but women are very good at not only are we nurturing, but just thinking of all those details that go very unnoticed, which
predicting those needs. Yes.
Yes, predicting. Great way to tie in that predictive analytics into this conversation.
We have our own predictive analytics engine.
Oh boy, do we. I mean, my fiance would have my son live off bananas if he could. But yeah, it's, I think that we have you're right. We have a very nice way of predicting what can happen and planning and pre-planning for that. So I think that's even more important that women get a seat at the technology table.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And now where can our listeners find you online?
Active on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me. I am happy to message you back and set up any types of conversations that you're interested in. My LinkedIn, you can find me under my name, Elise, Elise, and then Kohl-Grant, KOHL-GRANT. I also have a Twitter, EKG1029. I'm not as active on Twitter as I probably should be. That might change, but I'll definitely be around on LinkedIn if anyone wants to message me.
Well, thank you so much, Elise, and thanks for joining us. And thank you, folks, for joining us. Check out the Hit Like a Girl podcast and YouTube page for more great interviews like this one today. Cheers.